The morning sky over New Singapore should have been blue. Instead it glowed red with the light of 400 alien warships. They hung in the atmosphere like angry gods, their massive holes blocking out the sun and casting shadows across entire continents. Elena Vasquez stood on her apartment balcony and watched the ships. She held a cup of coffee that had gone cold 2 hours ago. Behind her, the news played on every screen, but she did not need to listen. She could see everything she needed to see just by looking up. The VTHK had arrived 3 weeks ago. They came without warning, without diplomacy, without any attempt at communication. One moment, the Sol system was quiet. The next moment, 400 warships dropped out of faster than light travel and surrounded Earth like wolves around a wounded deer. Their message was simple: surrender or die. Elena was 52 years old. Her hair was gray at the temples and her hands were rough from decades of service in the United Earth Navy. She had retired 5 years ago after the border skirmishes, a minor conflict that most people had already forgotten. Now she taught tactics at the Naval Academy, trying to pass on what little wisdom she had gathered to young officers who thought war was something that happened in history books. They were learning differently now. Her phone rang. She looked at the name on the screen and felt something heavy settle in her chest. Admiral Chen only called when things were very bad. She answered. Yes, Admiral. Elena. His voice was tired. He sounded like he had not slept in days. I need you at Central Command today. I'm retired, sir. So was I until 3 weeks ago. She heard him take a breath. This isn't about fighting, Elena. We both know we can't win a fight against those ships. I need you to think you were always better at that than anyone I knew. She looked up at the red sky. Again, the VTHK ships did not move. They had not moved since they arrived. They just floated there waiting. I'll be there in an hour, she said. Central Command was buried deep beneath the Australian desert. It had been built 100 years ago when humanity first realized that there were other species in the galaxy and that not all of them would be friendly. The facility could survive a direct nuclear strike. Elena was not sure if it could survive whatever weapons the VTHK carried. She walked through corridors filled with officers who looked too young and too scared. They saluted her as she passed. She returned each salute automatically, her mind already working on the problem. Admiral Chen waited for her in the strategic analysis room. He had aged 10 years and 3 weeks. His uniform hung loose on his frame and his eyes were red from lack of sleep, but his handshake was still firm when he greeted her. Thank you for coming, he said. You didn't give me much choice. Elena looked around the room. Screens covered every wall, showing different views of the blockade. Data scrolled constantly, tracking the position and energy signatures of every enemy ship. What's the current situation? Unchanged. Chen led her to a central display table. A holographic model of the Sol system floated above it, with Earth at the center and the VTHK fleet surrounding it like a sphere of thorns. They haven't fired a shot. They haven't repeated their surrender demand. They're just waiting for what? That's what I need you to figure out. Elena studied the display. The VFK formation was perfect. Every ship was precisely positioned, maintaining exact distances from its neighbors. No gaps, no weaknesses, no errors. It was the most disciplined fleet arrangement she had Ever seen? What do we know about the VTHK? She asked. Chen gestured and a new display appeared. It showed a reptilian creature 7 feet tall with scaled skin and 4 arms. Its eyes were yellow, with vertical pupils, and its mouth was filled with sharp teeth. They're an old species, Chen said. They've been traveling between stars for at least 10,000 years. Their territory covers 200 systems. They've conquered dozens of other species and absorbed them into their dominion. He paused. They've never lost a war, never, not once. Every species that resisted them was either destroyed or enslaved. The smart ones surrendered quickly and were allowed to keep some measure of independence, though they still served the Dominion. Elena felt cold despite the climate. Controlled air, and what does the Galactic Concord say about this? Nothing useful. Chen's voice turned bitter. They've declared neutrality. They say this is an internal matter between the VTHK Dominion and a non-member species. Since Earth never formally joined the Concord, they have no obligation to help us. Convenient, very. Chen sat down heavily. Elena, I'm going to be honest with you. The Global Council is ready to surrender. They're drafting terms right now. Our fleet has 30 ships. The VTHK have 400. The math doesn't work. Elena nodded slowly. She understood. She even agreed with the logic, but something bothered her about this whole situation, something she could not quite identify. Why haven't they attacked? She asked. What? They have 400 ships. We have 30. They could destroy our entire fleet in minutes and then bombard our cities until we surrender. Why are they just sitting there? Chen frowned. Maybe they're hoping for a peaceful surrender, less expensive than a battle, even one they would really win. Maybe. Elena walked around the display table, studying the holographic fleet from different angles. Or maybe there's something we don't understand about them, something in their culture that's making them wait. She spent the next 12 hours reading everything humanity had ever learned about the VTHK. It was not much. They were a secretive species who rarely interacted with outsiders except during conquest, but there were fragments of information gathered from other species, from intercepted communications, from ancient records found in abandoned colonies. The more she read, the more confused she became. The VTHK were warriors. Yes, their entire society was built around military service and honor in combat, but they were also bound by strict codes of behavior that went back thousands of years, rules that governed everything from how wars were declared to how prisoners were treated. One concept kept appearing in the records: the rights of challenge. According to VTHK tradition, any conflict could be resolved through formal combat between champions. A single warrior could represent an entire nation, an entire species. The outcome of that duel would determine the outcome of the war. Elena read the passages 3 times to make sure she understood them correctly. This doesn't make sense, she muttered to herself. No modern military would actually follow rules like this. But the more she researched, the more evidence she found. The VTHK had used the rights of challenge dozens of times throughout their history. Sometimes they won, sometimes their opponents won, but they always honored the outcome. She kept reading until the words blurred together. Then she slept for a few hours on a cot in the corner of her office. When she woke up, she went back to reading. On the second day, she found What she was looking for, it was buried in an academic paper written by a Zen anthropologist who had studied VTHK culture for 30 years. The paper discussed something called the Protocol of Acknowledgement according to VTHK tradition. When they arrived to conquer a new world, they would make their demands known and then wait for a formal response. That response could be surrender, it could be a declaration of war, or it could be a request for the rights of challenge, but there had to be a response. Without one, the VK were culturally prohibited from taking further action. Their entire military doctrine was built around formal declarations and formal responses. They literally did not know how to proceed. Without one, Elena sat back in her chair and laughed. It was not a happy sound. Humanity had not responded to the VTHK demands. The Global Council had argued and debated and formed committees, but they had never actually sent a formal reply. They were too busy trying to figure out what to do. And so the VTHK waited, not because they were patient or merciful, but because their ancient traditions would not allow them to move forward without an answer. She ran to Admiral Chen's office and burst through the door without knocking. I know why they're waiting, she said, and I know how we can win. Chen looked up from his desk, his eyes bloodshot and confused. Win, Elena? We can't win. We don't have the ships. We don't need ships. Elena grabbed a chair and sat down across from him. We need one person, one human, willing to walk up to their fleet commander and knock on his door. What are you talking about? Elena told him. She explained the right of challenge, the protocol of acknowledgement, the ancient traditions that bound the VTHK as surely as any chain. She taught for an hour, showing him the research, the historical examples, the evidence that this was not just theory but established fact. When she finished, Chen was quiet for a long time. You're suggesting, he said slowly, that we challenge the VTHK to single combat, one human against one of them, and whoever wins determines whether Earth surrenders or stays free. Yes, that's insane. Yes, a VTHK warrior would tear a human apart. They're bigger, stronger, faster. They have 4 arms and claws and teeth that can bite through steel. Probably. Elena leaned forward. But if we don't do something, we either surrender and become slaves, or we fight a battle we can't win and die. This way, we at least have a chance. A small C. The Global Council met in a bunker beneath Geneva. 12 representatives from 12 regions, each one responsible for billions of lives. They sat around a circular table and argued while the world held its breath. Elena waited in an antechamber, listening to the muffled sounds of debate through the thick walls. Admiral Chen had presented her proposal 3 hours ago. Since then, she had heard nothing but raised voices and occasional silences that felt even worse. She used the time to study. Her tablet was filled with everything humanity knew about VTHK combat traditions, the rituals, the rules, the weapons they used. She memorized details that might never matter because one of them might save her life. The door opened. Admiral Chen stepped out, his face unreadable. They want to see you, he said. The council chamber was smaller than she expected. The 12 representatives looked exhausted and frightened. Some of them were older than Elena, veterans of political battles that had shaped human history. Others were young, chosen for their brilliance rather than their experience. All of Them looked at her like she was either a savior or a fool. Counselor Akono spoke. First, she was a tall woman from the African Union, known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue, Commander Vasquez. She said, "You're proposing that we gamble the fate of 8 billion people on a fist fight." Not exactly, Counselor. Elena kept her voice calm. "I'm proposing that we use the VTHK's own traditions against them. They believe in the rights of challenge. If we invoke those rights, they have to accept. It's part of their cultural identity, and if you lose, then we're no worse off than we are now. They've already demanded our surrender. Losing the challenge would simply confirm what they expect to happen. Anyway," Counselor Yamamoto from the Pacific Federation leaned forward, "but if you win, they have to leave, just like that, according to every source I found. Yes, the VTHK have never broken their word once a challenge is accepted. Their honor depends on it, their honor." Counselor Rodriguez from South America laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We're betting everything on alien honor." Elena nodded. "I understand your skepticism, but consider this. The VTHK have been waiting for 3 weeks. They could have destroyed us at any moment, but they haven't. Why? Because they're following their own rules. They're waiting for us to respond properly." She paused. "If they follow their rules that strictly, then yes, I believe they'll honor the outcome of a challenge." The council members exchanged glances. Elena could see the calculations happening behind their eyes, the weighing of risks against alternatives, of hope against despair. Counselor Chen from the Asian Cooperative spoke quietly. "What are your chances of winning?" "Honestly, not good." Elena saw no point in lying. "That Veki are physically superior to humans in almost every way. Faster, stronger, more durable. They're warriors trained from childhood for exactly this kind of combat. Then why should we let you try? Because even a small chance is better than none." And because she hesitated, then continued, "Because I think there might be something they don't understand about humans, something that could give me an edge." Elena thought about how to explain it. "That Veki have fought dozens of species. They've won every time, but they've never fought humans before. They don't know what we're capable of. They don't know how stubborn we can be, how much pain we can endure, how hard we can push ourselves when everything depends on it." The chamber was quiet. "That's not much of an advantage." Counselor Okonkwo said. "No." Elena agreed, "But it's what I have." The vote took another hour. Elena waited outside again, pacing the small antechamber like a caged animal. She tried not to think about what would happen if they said no. She tried not to think about what would happen if they said yes. When Admiral Chen finally came to get her, his expression had changed. He looked like a man who had just watched someone sign their own death warrant. "They approved it," he said. 7-2-5. "You're authorized to issue a formal challenge to the VTHK fleet commander." Elena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "When do I leave?" "Tomorrow morning. We're preparing a diplomatic shuttle for you. It's small enough not to seem threatening, but it has full communication capabilities. You'll be able to broadcast your challenge to their entire fleet." "Gotcha." Turned to leave, then stopped. "Admiral, thank you for supporting this." Chen shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. I just helped send you to your death." Maybe she managed a small smile, or maybe you just gave humanity a chance. She spent that night alone in her Quarters preparing, the VTHK language was harsh and guttural, full of sounds that human throats were not designed to make, but Alina had always been good with languages. She practiced each word until her pronunciation was as close to perfect as she could manage. Challenge itself had to follow a specific format. There were phrases that had to be spoken in the right order, gestures that had to be made at the right time. One mistake could void the entire ritual and give the Vethite excuse to simply destroy her shuttle. She practiced until her voice was and her hands ached from the unfamiliar movements. Then she practiced some more. Around midnight, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find a young lieutenant standing nervously in the corridor. "Ma'am," he said, "there's something you should see in the observation room." She followed him through quiet hallways to a room with a massive window that looked out over the Australian desert above the horizon. The sky glowed red with the light of the alien fleet, but that was not what the lieutenant wanted to show her. "Look," he said, pointing. Alina looked in. Cities across the planet, people had gathered outside. They stood on rooftops and in parks and in the middle of streets, all of them looking up at the sky. Many of them held candles or flashlights, creating tiny points of light that mirrored the stars the alien ships had blocked out. "It's happening everywhere," the lieutenant said. "New Singapore, New York, Lagos, Mumbai. Billions of people all standing together, all watching." Alina felt something tighten in her chest. "Do they know about the challenge? The council announced it an hour ago. They thought people deserve to know." The lieutenant paused. "Ma'am, I wanted to tell you my whole family is out there right now. My parents, my sisters, everyone. They wanted me to say thank you for being willing to try." Alina did not trust herself to speak. She just nodded and watched the lights below, each one representing a person who was counting on her. She did not sleep that night. The shuttle was small and white, designed for diplomatic missions that rarely happened. Alina sat in the pilot seat, running through pre-flight checks for the third time. Everything was working perfectly, which somehow made her more nervous. Admiral Chun's voice came through the communication system. "Shuttle 7, you are cleared for launch. Godspeed, Commander." "Thank you, Admiral." Alina took one last look at the control panel, then engaged the engines. The shuttle rose smoothly into the red sky as she climbed through the atmosphere. The individual ships of the VTHK fleet became visible. They were massive, each one larger than any human vessel ever built. Their hulls were dark metal, covered with weapons and sensors, and strange markings that might have been writing or decoration. Alina counted the ships as she flew toward them. 400 instruments of destruction, each one capable of leveling a city, and she was flying toward them in a shuttle the size of a bus. She activated the communication system and took a deep breath. "VTHK Dominion Fleet," she said in carefully rehearsed V. "This is Commander Alina Vasquez of the United Earth Navy. I come bearing words of formal response to your demands." The channel was silent for a long moment. Then a voice answered, deep and rumbling and filled with what sounded like surprise. "Human vessel, you speak our language." "I speak it poorly," Alina admitted, "but I hope well enough to be understood." "You are understood. State your response." This was the moment. Alina closed her eyes, pictured the lights of all those candles and flashlights, all those people watching and hoping. Then she opened her eyes and spoke the ancient words, in accordance with the rites of challenge, as established in the third age of your civilization and honored through all the ages since I invoked the protocol of single combat, I request an audience with your fleet commander to formalize this challenge. I come alone without weapons, without deception. I ask only for the right to knock upon your door. The silence that followed was the longest of Alina's life. Then the voice returned, and this time it sounded different, uncertain, almost confused. Human vessel, hold your position. Your request is being considered. Alina held her position. Minutes passed, then in hours she floated in space, surrounded by 400 warships, waiting for an answer that could mean life or death for her entire species. Finally, the voice spoke again. Human vessel, you are granted permission to dock with the flagship. Approach. Vector being transmitted now. You will be met at the airlock and escorted to Fleet Commander Thorax. Thank you, Alina said, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it must be audible through the communication channel. She guided the shuttle toward the largest ship in the fleet. It was a monster of metal and power, easily 10 km long. As she approached, a docking bay opened in its side like a mouth, preparing to swallow her whole. She flew in anyway. The bay was vast enough to hold 100 shuttles her size, but the door opened slowly, revealing a chamber that took Alina's breath away. It was enormous, easily the size of a football stadium, with a ceiling that rose so high it disappeared into darkness. The walls were covered with weapons of every kind, blades and axes and strange curved implements that she could not identify. Banners hung between them, each one bearing symbols that probably represented victories, conquered worlds, defeated enemies. At the far end of the chamber, seated on a throne of black metal, was the largest Veka she had seen yet. Fleet Commander Thorax was a mountain of scaled muscle, an ancient power. His skin was deep green, almost black, marked with scars that told stories of battles fought across 100 worlds. His forearms rested on the arms of his throne, each one thick enough to crush Alina's skull without effort. His eyes, yellow and cold, watched her approach with the patience of a creature that had never needed to hurry. Alina walked forward. Her footsteps echoed in the vast space, each one marking another meter between her and any chance of retreat. Around the chamber, dozens of HFY officers stood at attention. They watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. She was a novelty to them, a soft creature that had somehow found the courage to walk into the heart of their power. She stopped at the prescribed distance, 10 m from the throne, and waited. Thorax studied her for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep enough to vibrate in her chest. You are the human who speaks our language. I am Alina kept her voice steady. You are the human who invokes the right of challenge. I am. Thorax leaned forward slightly. Despite the distance, Alina could feel the weight of his attention pressing down on her like a physical force. Do you understand what you ask for, small creature? The rites of challenge are ancient and sacred. They are not a game for lesser species to play at. I understand, Fleet Commander. Alina took a breath. I understand that your traditions are older than my entire species. I understand that you have used the rights to settle disputes for 10,000 years, and I understand that by invoking Them I bind my entire species to the outcome, and yet you still wish to proceed. I do. Thorax made a sound that might have been a laugh. Why, your people could surrender peacefully. They would be allowed to live, to work, to serve the Dominion in whatever capacity they are suited for. It is not a cruel fate. Many species have prospered under our rule, prospered as servants. Elena chose her words carefully. As workers and soldiers for an empire they did not choose, never as equals, never as free. Freedom is an illusion that the weak cling to. Thorax's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. The strong rule, the weak serve. This is the natural order of all things. Maybe Elena met his gaze without flinching, or maybe the natural order is just whatever the strong decide it should be until someone challenges them. The chamber went very quiet. Around the room, Bethkai officers exchanged glances that carried meanings Elena could not read. She had either said something very brave or very stupid, possibly both. Thorax was silent for a long moment. Then he rose from his throne. Standing, he was even more massive than she had imagined. He towered over her like a building, his shadow falling across her like a physical weight. He walked toward her, slowly, each step shaking the floor, until he stood close enough that she could smell the strange metallic scent of his breath. You are brave, little human, he said. Foolish but brave. I have not seen such courage in a challenger for many years. I'm not brave, Elena said. I'm just the one who showed up. That is the same thing. Thorax studied her with those ancient yellow eyes. Tell me your name. Challenger. Elena Vasquez. Commander, United Earth Navy. Elena Vasquez. He pronounced it carefully, as if tasting the sounds. You understand that if I accept your challenge, we will fight. Not with weapons, not in ways you understand. We will fight according to VTHK tradition, and you will almost certainly die. I understand. You understand, but you do not fear. It was not a question why. Elena thought about the question. She thought about the lights she had seen from the observation room, or those people standing together in the darkness. She thought about her parents, long dead, who had raised her to stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. She thought about the young lieutenant who had thanked her on behalf of his family. I fear many things, she said finally. I fear failure. I fear pain. I fear dying alone in a place far from home. She paused. But I fear living as a slave more. I fear watching my people bow down to masters who see them as nothing more than tools. I fear the death of everything we are, everything we could become. Thorax was quiet for a long moment. You speak of your people as if they are worth protecting, he said, but from what I know of humans, you spend most of your time fighting each other. Wars over resources, over beliefs, over nothing at all. Why should I believe you are anything more than another violent species destined to destroy yourselves? Because we're still here. Elena held his gaze. We've had every opportunity to destroy ourselves. We've come close more times than I can count, but we're still here. We keep finding reasons to survive, to build, to try again. We're not perfect. We're not even particularly wise, but we don't give up. And if you lose today, if I kill you and your people become servants of the Dominion, then they'll find a way to survive that too. And one day, maybe not in my lifetime, maybe not for generations, they'll find a way to be free again. She paused. That's what we do. We endure. We Adapt we wait, and when the moment comes we fight. Thorax stared at her. For a long time around the chamber, the watching officers barely seemed to breathe. Then the fleet commander did something unexpected. He stepped back, returned to his throne and sat down. I accept your challenge, Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Navy. The words hit her like a physical blow. She had hoped for this outcome, planned for it, but hearing it spoken aloud made it suddenly real. The terms Thorax continued will be as follows: single combat bladed. Weapons only. The fight continues until one combatant yields, loses consciousness or dies. The victor's side wins the conflict. If you prevail, my fleet will withdraw from your system, and the Dominion will recognize Earth as an independent world for 100 of your years. If I prevail, your species will submit to the Dominion immediately and completely. I accept these terms, Elena said, her voice steadier than she felt. You may choose your weapon from any blade in this chamber. You have one rotation of your planet to prepare. Thorax's eyes held something that might have been curiosity. I suggest you use the time well. Elena looked around at the walls lined with weapons, blades of every size and shape, some familiar, most completely alien. She walked slowly along the wall, studying each one. VTHK officers watched her with barely concealed amusement. She was a tiny human examining weapons designed for beings twice her size. Whatever she chose, they clearly expected it to make no difference. But Elena was not looking for the best weapon. She was looking for the most meaningful one. She stopped before a massive blade, curved and heavy, with symbols carved into its edge. It was clearly a ceremonial weapon designed to be impressive rather than practical. A VTHK weapon through and through. This one, she said. Sub-Commander Vector stepped forward, his expression confused. That is a ceremonial blade of challenge. It weighs more than you do. Human, you cannot possibly wield it. I'll manage. You will die in the first seconds of the fight. The fleet commander will not even need to strike. You will collapse under the weight of your own weapon. Elena turned to face him. Then I'll collapse with the VTHK blade in my hands, showing respect for your traditions with my final breath. That's my choice to make, isn't it? Vector had no answer for that. Thorax watched the exchange from his throne. Something shifted in his expression. Something that Elena could not quite read. The human is chosen, he said. It is done. Vector showed her to the Challenger's quarters. She will have everything she needs to prepare. Elena followed Vector out of the chamber, her mind already racing ahead to the battle that awaited her. The Challenger's quarters was surprisingly comfortable. Bed, a small bathroom, even a window that looked out at the stars. Elena stood at that window for a long time, watching the distant light of Earth's sun. Then she began to train. Ceremonial blade was indeed incredibly heavy. When the VTHK delivered it to her quarters, it took all her strength just to lift it off the ground, swinging. It was out of the question. She could barely hold it level for more than a few seconds. But Elena had not chosen the blade because she thought she could wield it well. She had chosen it because of what it represented. The VTHK respected tradition. They honored courage by choosing the most difficult weapon possible, by refusing to take the easy path. She was speaking to them in a language they understood, and she was also buying time. She practiced through The knight not trying to master the blade but learning to move with it. Learning how to shift her weight to compensate for its mass, learning how to use momentum instead of fighting against it. She would never be able to match Thorax in speed or strength, but she did not need to beat him, she just needed to show him some. The arena was built in the heart of the flagship, a massive circular space surrounded by a tiered seating that rose toward the distant ceiling. Thousands of HFY warriors filled those seats, their scales gleaming under harsh artificial lights. They had come to watch a spectacle. Human pretending she could challenge the greatest warrior in the Dominion. Elena walked into the arena through a gate designed for beings much larger than herself. She carried the ceremonial blade across her shoulders, its weight already sending dull pain down her spine. The weapon was not meant for her. Nothing here was meant for her, but she was here anyway. The crowd fell silent as she entered. 10,000 pairs of yellow eyes tracked her movement as she walked to the center of the arena, to the circle painted on the floor where the fight would begin. A large screen dominated one wall, displaying the fight to the entire fleet. Elena knew that somehow this was also being broadcast to Earth. 8 billion people were watching her right now, waiting to see if she would live or die. No pressure. A second gate opened on the far side of the arena. Fleet Commander Thorax emerged, and the crowd exploded with sound. They chanted his name, a rumbling chorus that shook the walls. They stamped their feet and clapped their foreheads, creating a rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of some enormous beast. Thorax walked through their adulation like he barely noticed it, his eyes fixed on Elena with the focus of a predator. He carried a blade as well, but where hers was massive and unwieldy, his looked perfectly balanced, an extension of his arm, a natural part of his body. He had clearly used it many times before, and he would use it many times again, unless she stopped him. Thorax stopped at the opposite edge of the circle, up close. He seemed even larger than before. His scars caught the light, each one a story of violence survived. His eyes held the calm certainty of a being who had never lost anything that mattered. A gong sounded somewhere in the distance. Rights of challenge are invoked. A voice announced, the terms have been agreed. The combatants have prepared. Let the fight begin. Another gong. The crowd went silent. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Thorax moved first. He crossed the distance between them in a blur of scaled muscle, his blade sweeping through the air in an arc that would have cut Elena in half. She barely got her own weapon up in time, and the impact nearly tore it from her hands. The force of the blow sent her stumbling backward, her arms screaming in protest. The crowd roared. Thorax pressed his advantage. He attacked again and again, each strike faster and harder than the last. Elena blocked when she could, dodged when she could not, and retreated step by step toward the edge of the circle. She had known she could not match him in combat. She had known from the beginning that any straight fight would end with her death, but knowing something and experiencing it were very different things. He was so fast, so impossibly fast for something so large. His blade seemed to come from every direction at once, and it took everything she had just to stay alive. A strike slipped through her guard and opened a gash across her left arm. Blood splattered across the arena floor. The pain was sharp and immediate, but she pushed it aside. She did not have time For pain right now, another strike. Caught her side, slicing through her uniform and into the flesh beneath. She felt the warm wetness of blood spreading down her hip. Her legs were getting weaker. Her arms could barely lift the blade. The crowd began to chant again. But the rhythm had changed. They were counting now, counting the seconds until she fell. 1, 2, 3. Elena blocked a strike that nearly broke her wrists. 78 dodged another that would have taken her head off. 15, 161, 17. Her feet slipped in her own blood and she went down on one knee. The crowd exploded with anticipation. This was it. This was the killing blow. Thorax raised his blade high, ready to end it. Elena looked up at him through the sweat and blood running into her eyes. Her whole body screamed at her to give up, to yield, to end the pain. Every instinct she had was begging her to stay down. She stood up. The crowd's chanting faltered. Thorax brought his blade down with all his strength. Elena threw herself to the side, too slow, too weak, too human. The blade caught her shoulder instead of her chest, cutting deep into muscle and scraping against bone. She screamed through gritted teeth and kept moving. She was on her feet again, still holding her blade, still facing him. The arena went quiet. Thorax attacked again. He cut her across the back as she tried to turn. He opened a wound on her thigh that made her leg nearly buckle. He struck her ribs with the flat of his blade, and she felt something crack inside her. But every time she fell, she stood back up. Every time he knocked her down, she rose again. The counting had stopped. The crowd watched in confused silence as this tiny broken human refused to do what every other challenger had done. Refused to yield, refused to die. Blood pulled on the arena floor. Elena could barely see through the pain. Her left arm hung useless at her side. Her breath came in ragged gasps that sent fire through her broken ribs. She was dying. She knew she was dying, but she was still standing. Thorax paused for the first time since the fight began. He actually looked at her, not as a target, not as an obstacle, but as something he did not understand. Why do you continue? He asked. His voice was quiet, almost confused. You cannot win. You must know this. Why do you not yield? Elena spat blood onto the floor. Because that's not what we do. What you do, your species, you throw yourselves against impossible odds and die for nothing, not nothing. Elena forced her broken body to stand straight for everything, for our home, for our people, for the chance that maybe, just maybe, will prove you wrong about us. She lifted her blade. It took every ounce of strength she had left. Her arms shook, her vision blurred, but she lifted it. So come on, she said, finish it. Kill me if you can, but know this. There will be another human after me, and another after that. You can kill us one at a time. You can kill us by the millions, but you will never make us stop fighting. You will never make us stop standing up. That's what we are. That's what we do. We knock on doors that should stay closed. We fight battles we should lose. We get up when we should stay down. She took a step toward him, then another. Her body was failing, but her will burned brighter than ever. You wanted to know what humans are capable of. She was close enough now to see her own reflection in his eyes. This is what we're capable of. Not strength, not speed, not weapons or ships or technology. Just this, the refusal to quit, the inability to stay down, the stubborn, stupid, impossible belief that we can win even When we can't, she swung her blade. It was slow, pathetic. A child could have blocked it. Thorax caught it on his own weapon with barely any effort. There. Blades locked together for a moment. You will have to kill me, Elena whispered, and then the next one who knocks, and the next. We don't stop. We never stop. Thorax stared at her. The arena was completely silent. For a long moment nothing moved. Two beings stood, frozen in the center of the circle. Their blades crossed, their eyes locked. One was dying, one could end it with a single motion, and then Thorax did something no one expected. He stepped back, he lowered his blade, he looked at Elena with an expression she had never seen on a VTHK face before. Was it respect? Was it fear? She could not tell. She could barely see anything anymore. The world was going gray at the edges. You asked me a question earlier, Thorax said slowly. You asked what message you were sending by choosing that blade. Elena said nothing. She did not have the strength. I understand now. Thorax looked down at his own weapon, then back at her. You came here to die. You knew you could not win. You knew from the beginning, but you came anyway. You chose the hardest path, the most painful path, because you wanted us to see something. He sheathed his blade. You wanted us to see that humanity does not break. Elena felt her legs finally give out. She collapsed to her knees, then forward onto her hands. Blood dripped from too many wounds to count. She was cold, so cold, but she was still conscious, still aware, still listening. In 40 years, Thorax said, I have never seen anyone take that much punishment and refuse to yield. I have never seen such determination in any species anywhere in the galaxy. He paused. I have never been afraid of a challenger before today. Elena looked up at him. Afraid not of you. Thorax shook his head. Of what you represent, of what your species might become if we give you 100 more years to grow, of the next human who knocks on our door, and the one after that, and the one after that. He turned to face the watching crowd. One invoked the protocol of mutual withdrawal. He announced, this challenge is concluded with no victor. Neither side yields, neither side prevails. The conflict ends here. A gasp ran through the arena. Voices rose in confusion and protest. This was not how challenges ended. Someone had to win. Someone had to lose. But Thorax silenced them with a look. This human has shown me something I have never seen before. He said, she has shown me the limits of conquest. What good is victory if the defeated refuse to accept it? What good is an empire if the conquered never stopped fighting? He looked back at Elena, who was barely conscious. Now go home, Elena Vasquez. Tell your people what happened here. Tell them that the VTHK Dominion will withdraw from your system. Tell them that we will return in 100 years to see what humanity has. Beck. Elena woke in a hospital bed on Earth. The room was white and clean and filled with machines that beeped softly. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Actual sunlight, warm and golden and beautiful. For a long moment she just lay there and let it wash over her face. She was alive. She had not expected that. A nurse noticed she was awake and ran to get the doctors. Within minutes, her room was filled with medical staff, checking monitors, adjusting equipment, and asking questions. She was too tired to answer. Admiral Chin arrived an hour later. He looked like he had aged another decade, but he was smiling. You did it, he said, sitting down beside her bed. I don't know how, but you did. A dip. Her voice was rough from disuse. How long had she been unconscious? 2 weeks, Chen said, answering her unspoken question. The VTHK brought you back themselves, put you in some kind of stasis pod to keep you alive. During the trip, their medical technology, as he shook his head, we learned more from studying that pod than we've learned in decades of our own research. They brought me back. Elena tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through every part of her body. Why, Fleet Commander? Thorax sent a message with you, he said. Chen pulled out a tablet and read from it. He said, return this human to her people. She has earned the right to die among her own kind, if she dies at all. I suspect she will not. Her species does not seem to know how. Elena laughed, which hurt terribly, but she could not help it. The fleet is gone, Chen continued. They left while you were still unconscious. 400 ships just pulled back into deep space and vanished. The Galactic Concord is losing their collective minds trying to figure out what happened. What did happen? Elena asked. I remember pieces. The fight, the blood, him saying something about withdrawal, but after that the entire thing was broadcast to Earth. Everyone saw it. Chen's voice softened. Elena, you became the most famous human in history overnight. There are statues of you being built in a dozen cities. The Global Council has created a new holiday in your honor. Children are being named after you. That's ridiculous, is it? Chen shook his head. You walked into the heart of an alien armada with nothing but courage and stubbornness. You stood up to a being that could have killed you with one hand, and you made him back down. You saved 8 billion lives. I didn't win the fight. No, you did something better. You changed how they see us. Chen stood up and walked to the window. The VTHK have been watching us since they withdrew. Their ships are still out there, just beyond sensor range. They're not threatening us anymore. They're observing, studying, trying to understand what us. Chen turned back to face her. That's what Thorax said in his message. He said humanity is a puzzle they've never encountered before, a species that gets stronger when pushed, more determined when defeated, more united when threatened. He said his people need to understand us before they decide whether to be our enemies or our friends. Elena processed this slowly. The pain medication was making her thoughts fuzzy. So we have a 100 red years, she said. According to the terms of the withdrawal, yes, 100 years before they return to see what we've become. And then what? That's up to us. Chen smiled. But I have a feeling we're going to surprise them again. Over the following months, Elena recovered slowly. Her body had been through trauma that would have killed most people, and even with VTHK-assisted healing, it took time to put herself back together. The world treated her as a hero. Everywhere she went, people stopped to thank her, to shake her hand, to tell her what her sacrifice had meant to them. She accepted it all gracefully, though privately she felt strange about the attention. She had not done anything heroic. She had just refused to give up. But maybe that was heroism after all. 6 months after her return, a new ship appeared in the Sol system. Not a warship this time, a small diplomatic vessel flying the colors of the VTHK Dominion, but transmitting signals of peaceful intent. Elena was the first human to greet them. She stood in the reception hall of the new galactic embassy, watching as the airlock opened and a familiar figure stepped through. Subcommander Vector looked exactly as she remembered him, tall and scaled and carrying the weight of ancient traditions on his shoulders. "Commander Vasquez," he said, "you survived. You sound surprised." "I am." Something that might have been a smile crossed his face. "Fleet Commander Thorax bet me you would. I thought your injuries were too severe," he said. "I did not understand humans yet." And now Vector considered the question. "Now I begin to think that perhaps no one understands humans, not even humans themselves. You are a very confusing species. We get that a lot." They walked together through the embassy, past human diplomats and alien visitors and guards from a dozen different species. The galactic conquered had suddenly become very interested in Earth now that the VTHK had given them a 100 red-year pass. "Why are you really here?" Elena asked. "The diplomatic mission is just cover for something else, isn't it?" Vector's eyes flickered with something like respect. "You are perceptive." "Yes, I have a secondary purpose." He reached into his ceremonial robes and pulled out a long object wrapped in silk. "Fleet Commander Thorax asked me to deliver this to you personally." Elena unwrapped the silk slowly. Inside was a blade, not just any blade, the ceremonial blade of Challen that she had used in the arena. Her hands trembled as she held it. The weight was exactly as she remembered. The metal still bore dark stains that might have been her blood. The fleet commander had it cleaned and repaired, Vector said, but he insisted that some marks remain. He said they tell a story that should not be forgotten. "I don't understand." Elena turned the blade over in her hands. "This is a VTHK artifact. It must be worth more than most planets." It is Vector's voice, solemn, which is why the fleet commander wants you to have it. In our culture, when a warrior shows exceptional courage, they are honored with the weapon they used in that moment. "You earned this blade, Commander. It belongs to no one else." Elena stared at the weapon for a long time. She thought about the arena, the pain, the absolute certainty that she was going to die. She thought about standing up when every part of her body told her to stay down. "Tell Fleet Commander Thorax I accept his gift," she said, "and tell him I look forward to seeing him again," he said. "You would say that?" Vector made a sound that might have been a laugh. "He also said to warn you that in a 100 years he intends to challenge you to a rematch. He wants to see if human stubbornness improves with age. Tell him I'll be ready." Vector nodded. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Commander Vasquez, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "During the challenge, when you were bleeding and broken and barely able to stand, what kept you going? What made you refuse to yield when yielding would have ended your pain?" Elena thought about the question. She thought about all the easy answers she could give, the heroic speeches about duty and honor and sacrifice, but Vector deserved better than that. "I thought about the people who couldn't be there," she said finally. "The children who would grow up as slaves. If I failed, the families who would be separated, the dreams that would never come true." She paused. "I thought about what would happen to them if I stayed down, and I decided that my pain didn't matter as much as their future." Vector was quiet for a moment. "That is a very human answer," he said. "Is that a compliment or an insult?" "I am not sure." He bowed, a gesture of respect that Elena had never seen a Vekai make to any other species. "Perhaps in 100 years I will know," he left, Elena stood, alone in the embassy holding a blade that represented everything humanity had fought for and everything they had yet to become. Through the window she could see the sky. It was blue again. The sun was shining. Ships from a dozen different worlds moved through the atmosphere, bringing trade and ideas, and the first real peace Earth had ever known with the wider galaxy. All because one human had knocked on a door. Elena smiled and went back to work. There was still so much to do. 100 years sounded like a long time, but she knew better. It would pass in the blink of an eye, and when it did that, VTH Kai would return to see what humanity had become. She intended to make sure the answer was worth the wait. In cities across the world, statues of her stood. In public squares, children learned her name. In schools, the story of the human who knocked past into legend, told and retold until it became part of humanity's identity. But the real Elena Vasquez did not spend much time thinking about statues or legends. She was too busy helping to build the future, working with the young officers who would carry humanity forward long after she was gone. One day, years later, a young cadet asked her what she thought humanity's greatest strength really was. Elena looked out at the stars, at the infinite darkness that held so many wonders and so many dangers. She thought about Fleet Commander Thorax out there, somewhere watching and waiting. We knock, she said, when doors are close to us, when we're told to go away, when the universe itself